A few years ago, I posted on social media a list of 10 books at the request of several people who wrote to me asking which books I would consider the most important to read. In other words, the ones you just can't miss. I made a list of my personal preferences, things I considered quite vital and interesting, not related to literature or even philosophy, but universal classics that I believe are essential for everyone to read. Today, I decided to bring a few of these books to you, 5 of them, which is half of the list. So we can have a quick chat about them, and I can explain a bit why I consider reading these books so important. I'm not going to recommend any publishers. I ask that you look for the one you trust the most, because all of them have versions from various publishers. So I'll start by talking about the Bhagavad Gita. It's a well-known classic in the West. Its arrival in the West was very impactful because of the vast wisdom it contains. Very inspiring. It's an Indian classic, part of a larger epic, an Itihasa, as it's called in India, which tells a very long story of India itself, which is the Mahabharata. In this Mahabharata, at a certain point, a work was inserted into it, probably after it was written. It's believed that the Bhagavad Gita dates back to around 600 years before Christ, although that's quite uncertain. But this Bhagavad Gita was inserted into the Mahabharata at a point where a war takes place. The story talks about a family, a big family, where the cousins are divided by a battle, a dispute over the possession of a city. And these cousins, on one side, are the Kaurava princes, and on the other side, the Pandava princes, with the Kauravas led by Duryodhana, and the Pandavas led by Arjuna, Prince Arjuna. When the battle is about to start, Prince Arjuna has his chariot driven by Krishna as his charioteer. Let's see, Krishna is an avatar of the god Vishnu, meaning he is the very image of divinity for this tradition. So Krishna goes to the middle of the battlefield with Prince Arjuna, and when Arjuna is about to release the first arrow to signal the start of the fight, he looks around and sees only relatives. And he becomes very haggard by the sight, and he falls disheartened in his chariot because he didn't want to fight his own relatives. And then Krishna starts a conversation with Arjuna, explaining why this war is necessary. Actually, it's about an inner war within a person, between what he truly is and what he temporarily is, between his flaws and his virtues. It's a necessary battle for us to achieve the fulfillment of our full human condition, so that we can get closer to what is divine. So, the whole story is about this dialogue between a divine being, Krishna, and a prince, Arjuna, asking questions and getting answers about the fundamental things in life. What are the acts that are worthy? What actions should be pursued and which should be avoided? The whole setup of how dharma, karma, and human life work. It's an extremely important book. I wouldn't even say it's important. I'd rather say it's fundamental. Within this small work, because it's a very compact book, you'll find many of the main questions a human being should ask themselves throughout their life, answered very well and in an incredibly beautiful way. I brought for you, just so we can capture a little bit of this book's passage, a small excerpt for us to read. Those whose minds are always in serene concentration have already made their lives a triumph on this earth. Given that God is one and always pure, by becoming one with him, all attain his divine attributes. In other words, the union of the human being in their essence, which is also divine, with the one and absolute divine in the universe. And then realization happens. You'll see that this is one of the most recurring arguments in Eastern literature. The need to unite what is divine within us with what is divine in the universe. As a Western thinker, Plotinus and so many thinkers throughout human history have also said, The enlightened one who sees Brahman lives in Brahman. Having removed from himself all the illusion, his mind is in perfect calm. Once this state is reached, neither pleasure nor pain can shake him. In other words, the need to master our thoughts. Concentration, mastery, the ability to create inner silence, so we can see beyond thought. What is hidden within us? As some works say, in the lotus of the heart, that divine essence that exists within us. And that means the need to master our thoughts. He's no longer attached to external things because, within himself, he finds all joy, meaning he's self-sufficient. Everything he needs is within himself. His joy is constant and eternal because his soul has already attained union with Brahman. The wise man will never seek joy in the things of this world because the pleasures they bring are merely the harbingers of the sufferings that will follow. Everything's transient. Just as it comes, it goes. In other words, the one who clings to the temporary will share its fate. That is, his consciousness will have the illusion of death because it will be as fleeting as the things he clings to. The one who has some wisdom never clings to the fleeting. Seek the eternal and indestructible essence within yourself and in everything around you. The one who seeks to see God in all things. But the one who, before leaving this world, while still in this physical body, manages to overcome the impulses of desires and passion, that man is a true yogi and his happiness is permanent. Yoga, which comes from the word link, has a close connection with religion, which comes from religio religare, meaning to reunite man with God in a close bond. And the one who manages to master his impulses gets closer to what is enduring and true within him. Once the inner light is revealed, your joy and happiness come from within. That is just a small piece that shows you how he goes through the process of man. Silence the senses that were turned outward and turn them inward. Learn to develop your inner senses. Make silence. Master your mind and deeply trace within yourself your divine essence. And upon finding it, you'll discover that the essence of man, the essence of all beings, is of the same nature as the essence of the cosmos, in other words, as God. We are made of the same substance, as if we were cells of God. And the book goes on like this, discussing things of this level of importance. Consider the Bhagavad Gita a book that deeply touches the soul and must be read with great care and calm. I recommend for those who are interested, there's a lecture on our YouTube channel about the Bhagavad Gita that provides guidance on reading it, which will help you understand it better. So this is an indispensable first work. A second work that I also recommend, which I find not only beautiful, but also full of wisdom for those who are interested, and there are also a series of lectures about it on YouTube, is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. This long prose poem, not that long actually, the book is relatively small, but it deals with all the fundamental issues of human life. Gibran dreamed of writing this book since his childhood and teenage years. A book that, through poetic language, could explain the fundamental things of life. Love, death, work, children, fear, everything a person can go through, how to deal with all these things, the fundamental realities of life. And not only does he explain in a beautiful way, but also in an extremely symbolic manner, where he conveys a lot of wisdom. It points out a lot of what really happens to a person. You have to know how to decode the life wisdom it conveys between the lines of the poem. I have on YouTube, as I've already mentioned to you, a lecture for each chapter of this book. So you have a well-guided reading that will help you understand. It's a beautiful book that holds a lot of wisdom. It has a lot to offer us. I also brought you a small excerpt from one of the chapters I like and value the most, which is the one that talks about prayer. A priestess said, "Tell us about prayer." And then he, among other things, is going to say the following: I cannot teach you the words to pray. God does not listen to your words, except those that he himself pronounces through your lips. And I cannot teach you the prayer of the seas, the forests, and the mountains. But you, who were born of the mountains, the forests, and the seas, will be able to find their prayers in your heart. In other words, when our voice merges with the divine voice, when we discover the divine within us, when we speak through God's voice, that prayer will be heard. When it's a voice from our personality asking for trivial, superficial, non-transcended things, we have no reason to expect that to be answered. When our voice is the echo of God's own voice, that voice will be heard. And we, who share the same origin as all of nature, can understand this silent prayer of thanks that all of nature offers to its creator. Seas, mountains, fields, they all have this prayer of praise, of gratitude to the one who created them. And if you listen in the silence of the night, you will hear them speaking in silence. Our God, who lives in our winged being, it is your will in us that you desire. It is your desire in us that you wish for. It is your inspiration in us that turns our nights, which are yours, into days that are also yours. We cannot ask you for anything, for you know our needs before they arise in us. You are our need, and by giving us more of yourself, you give us everything. In other words, what we basically need is to have this closeness with the divine self. All other things are unnecessary. These are fantasies created by our illusion of a personality that's very attached to the superficial, very attached to the trivial. We no longer turn inward to ourselves. Because if we know ourselves intimately, we will know that our need aligns exactly with God's will. And there will be nothing more to ask for. There are several chapters as beautiful as this one. The whole book is lovely. The part about love is wonderful. The part that talks about laws is wonderful. And the section on work is irreplaceable. There's no passage as beautiful to talk about work as this one from the Prophet by Khalil Gibran. If you read carefully, extracting the meanings from each chapter, you'll not only find it beautiful, but you'll learn a lot from this book. It has a lot to teach. I recommend it. Don't miss out on reading it. It's really worth it. Both of the books I've mentioned so far are small books, quick reads. I don't recommend reading them too quickly. You should chew on them slowly because of the depth they have, but they are small books. What else? Thirdly, there's a book by an author I really like from the 19th century, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Helena Blavatsky wrote a book called The Voice of the Silence, which is nothing more than an excerpt from the teachings she received when she was in contact with Tibetan Buddhism. She brings back some memorized verses, some passages from a book, which is the Book of the Golden Precepts, and writes down in the West this part she memorized, which is the Voice of the Silence. The Voice of the Silence, which is also a tremendously symbolic book, but very beautiful, talks about how we can get in touch with this inner voice of ours, which at the moment we don't hear, so it seems like the voice of silence. Why? Because we don't fine-tune our ears to listen so deeply. We hear the voice of our body, which wants rest. We hear the voice of our mind, which is curious to discover things. The voice of our emotions, which always wants pleasures, wants fun. We don't hear the voice of our deep, inner self, our true identity, and it has a lot to tell us deeply. And what this book will show is a path for us to learn how to silence the other voices, so we can finally hear the voice of silence. The moment we hear the voice of this silent speaker, we find ourselves. We find our true identity. The book is as beautiful as if it were a poem itself, but it brings a lot of wisdom, many symbols. So I also recommend watching the lecture about it on the YouTube channel so you can better understand and deal with the symbols, another essential content. I also brought a small excerpt for you all so we can savor it together. This beautiful book. Sow kind actions and you'll reap their rewards. Inaction, in an act of mercy, turns into action in a mortal sin. In other words, always sow kind actions. Don't let yourself be overcome by inaction. Would you want to abstain from action? That's not how your soul will achieve its liberation. To reach nirvana, it's essential to achieve self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is the child of loving acts. In other words, self-knowledge is achieved through loving acts. In other words, it encourages action, loving acts. Have patience, candidate, like someone who neither fears failures nor courts successes. Fix the gaze of your soul on the star whose ray you are. The blazing star that shines within the dark depths of the permanent being, from the boundless fields of the unknown. Have perseverance, like someone who tends to persist forever. Your shadows live and fade away. What lives in you forever, one you knows because it is knowledge, does not belong to fleeting life. It's the man who was, who is, and who will be, for whom the hour will never strike. In other words, when we dive into ourselves, into this unknown field, we find this star, this man who doesn't pass away because he is not a child of time. This is our immortal and divine essence. If you want to choose sweet peace and rest, disciple, sow the fields of future harvests with seeds of merit. Accept the pains of birth. Step away from the sunlight into the shade to make more room for others. The tears that water the barren soil of pain and sadness give rise to the flowers and fruits of karmic retribution. In other words, the pains and sorrows we overcome generate merit, generate wisdom. In other words, overcoming suffering makes us grow when we face it the right way. From the furnace of human life and its dense smoke, winged flames leap out, purified flames, which, rising high under the karmic gaze, finally weave the glorious fabric of the three robes of the path. In other words, in this short passage, it talks about the need not to give up on action, and that action should be, above all, the pursuit of loving acts that we must face with courage the pains inherent in a transient and fleeting world. That from these pains, we can synthesize wisdom. We will finally find the path to ourselves, the path to that which is untouched by time, death, or life, that which is permanent. This, then, is a wonderful book as well. For sure, it will be one of the most impactful books in your life. As it was for me, if read the right way, with calm, with care, to decode each symbol, understanding the message being given. I hope you get excited to read it. It's really worth it. What else? Here we have the Indian classic, which is the Ramayana. This Ramayana is a book similar to the Mahabharata that I mentioned to you. In Indian tradition, there are two epics that are very important, like the Iliad and the Odyssey are for the West. There you have these two epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The Mahabharata, which we've already talked about, contains the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana, which is another epic that tells the story of Prince Rama. This Prince Rama, from the city of Ayodhya, had his wife Sita kidnapped by a Rakshasa, a demonic being who is Ravana. And he sets out to find his wife, to win her back and bring her home. And he takes with him all the beings of nature who fight alongside Dharma, who fight on the side of good. The book is incredibly beautiful. I recommend to you this translated and synthesized version for the West by William Buck. It's a feasible version to read, since the Ramayana itself is very long, just like the Mahabharata, which is even bigger. It's a version where the main events are told in a very beautiful way. It's a summary, actually. The book is huge, but it's a good way to have your first contact with the Ramayana. It's really worth it. And the work is absolutely beautiful and constantly talks about the laws of nature, harmony, beauty, and wisdom. It goes on all the time. With each episode, there are several little stories woven into the big story. And each episode explains a chapter about life to us. Something important for us to understand, so we can get through life well, to comprehend it, to interact with it in a sober and intelligent way, so that it opens the path for us towards the conquest of our own being. The Ramayana is, perhaps, the most beautiful book I've ever read in my life. It's really worth reading. I highly recommend it to you all. Don't be prejudiced. Don't think it's going to be difficult. There's also a lecture on YouTube. I recommend you watch it. But it's a book that has a lot to teach you. I also brought a little excerpt for us to read together. I hope you like it. In this excerpt, Prince Rama talks with his brother Bharata. He's going to say the following. "The first betrayal might be easy," said Rama. "But after the first betrayal, the others will soon follow." The heart, Bharata, pay attention to your heart and don't suffocate it. There lives the soul, clear, never stained, seeing everything we do or intend to do. So, let the man be silent and find his heart. This is the only sure salvation. Remember we talked a little while ago about silence, silencing even the mind, turning our senses inward, awakening the inner senses and finding in the lotus flower of our heart our essence. What we truly are, that which neither time, nor space, nor life, nor death can overcome. That's what he's going to talk about here. Do everything, but don't betray your heart, because otherwise, everything is lost. You have to know how to preserve your own heart. Today we know that the heart, and this is scientific, is also equipped with an entire neural network. In other words, there's also a kind of sensitivity, a perception in the heart. This is very close to those traditions that often say the essence of a human being resides in the lotus of the heart. That by feeling it, by being able to notice when it hurts, when it signals something's wrong, by having a dialogue with it, we can refine our path. We can illuminate our path. Here, once again, we have the same approach. What good will a castle, a palace, or a great stone fortress do if they can't protect you from time? Since we came together, our separation will be inevitable someday. While we're together, like two men during life, let's hold on to the truth. Life is bright and colorful for a fleeting moment, like the sunset. Then it goes away. Who can stop it from leaving? Therefore, Bharata, since you are in this dangerous body, lament your own condition. Mourn for yourself and don't lament anything else. In other words, once we're tied to something very material, we often develop an attachment to it, which stops us from realizing who we really are. We're only connected to this temporary shell, completely identified with it, and it often enslaves us, preventing us from diving into ourselves and finding our true identity. If there's anything to mourn, he tells Bharata, mourn for that, for your imprisonment, for being isolated from self-knowledge. Because there's no point in being attached, mourning, or chasing after material objects. These are all shadows, all transient, they'll all pass. We must seek what endures, just like Dharma itself, that which is eternal within each of us. This is one of the many passages that I find absolutely beautiful in this book. There are passages that are truly worthy of a painting. They're really beautiful. The book is definitely worth reading. It's inspiring and will also give you a lot of information about life. It will teach you a lot of wisdom about living well as a human being. It's really worth it. Once again, I recommend William Buck's translation because it's simpler, easier for a Western person to understand. He did exactly that for this purpose. And finally, for our meeting today, considering we're only working with 5 books today, I bring you the Analects of Confucius. This Confucius, who was born in 557 BC, meaning he lived in the 6th century BC, in China, a feudal China made up of various kingdoms, was born in the Principality of Lu. After he stopped being an advisor to the king of Lu, he traveled through all the kingdoms of that time, or almost all, trying to pass on his wisdom to princes and common people. He taught about kindness, about benevolence, about honesty, about justice, about the ceremonial and sacred way of looking at life. In other words, everything in its place, a harmonious life, everything done with the greatest kindness possible. Man, in this way, finds his own place in the world, when everything is within him in its rightful place, when those more divine values within him take charge. Confucius was a great master who is becoming more and more known today, but a great master who brings a very special, practical wisdom for life, for mankind. It talks about how to lead our lives, what values should guide our lives. It's a very special book. I also brought a small excerpt for us to read together. Tzu Shang asked Confucius about benevolence. Confucius said, "There are 5 things, and anyone who is able to put them into practice in the empire is certainly benevolent. Can I ask what those things are?" Said Tzu Shang. And Confucius replies, "They are respect, tolerance, consistency with one's own words, promptness, and generosity." In other words, 5 things: tolerance, consistency with one's own words, promptness, and generosity. 5 things that help us put our benevolence into practice. If a man is respectful, he won't be treated with insolence. If he is tolerant, he will win over the people. If he is consistent with his own words, his peers will trust him. If he is prompt, he will achieve results. If he is generous, he will be good enough to be placed in a position where he can benefit his peers. Continuing with another passage, also very beautiful. Have you heard about the 6 qualities and the 6 mistakes we should guard against? Says Confucius. Yu replies, no. Then Confucius replies, sit down and I'll tell you. Loving benevolence without loving learning can lead to foolishness. Wanting to be good without wanting to learn. Loving cleverness without loving learning can lead to straying from the right path. Wanting to be clever without wanting to be good is tremendously dangerous. Loving consistency with one's own words without loving learning can lead to destructive behavior. I might have a wrong word, and if I don't learn, I won't correct it. I'll just be consistent with the mistake. Loving determination without loving learning can lead to intolerance. In other words, being determined without having wisdom can make a man stubborn, intolerant, and that's bad. That's tremendously negative. Loving courage without loving learning can lead to insubordination. Loving strength without loving learning can lead to indiscipline. In other words, in both passages, he highlights something very important. The one who isn't aware that he doesn't know and doesn't want to learn, who lacks the spirit of a learner, can turn all his virtues into vices. He might insist on things that aren't benevolent, things that aren't good. In other words, besides all the virtues a man should have, he must have a great love for growth, for learning, for taking his consciousness step by step, higher and broader, becoming more human each time. In other words, the need to know that we don't own any truth, and have the spirit of a learner, always wanting to learn from each day, from every moment in life, always coming out of the days bigger than when you went in. always being surprised, as Gibran said, by the mornings at a different point from where the night left you. In other words, always moving forward, pushing your consciousness further, pushing boundaries further, always growing. That's the role of a human being. Anyway, these are some excerpts from the books I brought for you, these 5 which talk more or less about the same thing. How are we going to build our lives as human beings? How are we going to find our true identity? How are we going to fulfill ourselves? How are we going to relate well? In other words, how are we going to live well as humans? And it's one of the things we most need to learn. Today, we can explain how any machine works, no matter how simple it is, but we can't explain how life works. And even though we've created a lot of technology about knowing how to live well as humans, we're still very basic. We still have a lot to learn. We've developed only one side of civilization, which is doing things well, and very little the other, of doing well by ourselves, to build ourselves in the right way. We're very childish in this aspect. And there's a lot of really good literature that helps us with this, to be more human, to walk through life leaving a bright trail, to be a positive influence, to make a difference in the world for others, for ourselves, for the world itself. So once again, I want to emphasize it's really worth getting to know this literature. On another occasion, we'll talk about the other 5. A big hug to you and happy reading.